Dori Ann Myers was a 43-year-old from Vero Beach, Florida. She had a son and loved poker. On the evening of January 10th, 2006, Dori went out to a couple bars, then ended up back at her house, allegedly with two military veterans. Early the next morning, Dori's house and car were found on fire. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. If you ever read articles that cover such things, fire is considered to be one of the greatest human achievements of all time, along with the invention of the wheel, the computer, and the printing press. The ability to make and control fire allowed humans to live in areas they could never inhabit before, to cook meat, making it safer to consume for its nutrients, to forge metals and create alloys that moved our distant ancestors into the Bronze and Iron Ages, to create methods of transportation, from the steam engine to jet propulsion. Without the knowledge of how to create fire, humans would still be living in caves. Of course, due to human nature, that which is inherent in our genes all these centuries later, despite our technological achievements, I am guessing within a few days of the discovery of fire, one caveman tried to kill another with it. And fire continues to be an element of many crimes in the 21st century. And this is what we will be talking about today in covering the disappearance of Dori Ann Myers. She went out on the town like she usually did. Then Dori came home with two men who claimed to be Iraqi war vets. They were having a great time. Dori had seemingly even prepared her couch for one of them to sleep on it. Then somebody started Unfriendly fires. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's website, charleyproject.org. Dori Ann Myers, although being a friendly and outgoing woman, never seemed to get over the death of her first husband. He was killed in the early 80s in a traffic accident. She got married, then divorced, married again, divorced again. Those relationships never reached the level that Dori had reached with her first love. But Dori did the best she could, raising her son as a single parent while working as a beautician. And she succeeded. Dori also threw herself into helping veterans and others who had suffered more than she had in life. So on January 10th, 2006, Dori went out to a local bar in the hopes of getting into a poker tournament. However, every table was already full. She then went to another bar, then another. Dori was seen at each of these other locations. Yet at 10 p.m., Dori's ex-boyfriend called her and she was already at home. She claimed that she had met two military veterans while she was out and invited them back to her place. Dori seemed happy and relaxed. But at 12:30 a.m. the next morning, neighbors heard arguing emanating from Dori's house. Then at 3 a.m., they heard the garage door go up, followed by the sound of a car trunk slamming. Looking out, a neighbor saw Dori's car speed away. Minutes later, the same person saw flames inside Dori's home. The fire department arrived and put out the fire. They did not find Dori inside. However, her pets were killed. Hours later, and 80 miles away, someone called in a car fire. The vehicle ended up being Dori's. Her remains were not found there either. She was never seen again. Unlike many disappearances Unfound has covered, Dori's disappearance has a wealth of information, pictures, and statements. Still, there are many questions that the facts don't answer. Number 1. Who were the two military vets, and if they're innocent, why have they never come forward? Number 2. How did the car fire get called in so quickly because it happened out in the middle of nowhere? And number 3. Who was the man Dori was dating at the time, whose cat she allegedly was pet sitting, yet the cat's remains were not found in the rubble of the house fire? Dori's family is open to different theories as to who is responsible for her disappearance. However, they completely reject the idea that she set fire to her own house and car, in the process killing her pets. The guest for this episode is Dori's sister, Donna Jean Cap. Unfound News. Many of you know I write a private blog at Patreon concerning all of the cases covered on Unfound. These entries are usually only available to Patreon supporters. However, I will be making the analysis of Dori Myers' disappearance available to everyone. Please look for the link to the Patreon write-up in the discussion group and on the Unfound podcast page on Facebook, and also on Twitter. Next, I'm continuing to work with a documentary filmmaker who is committed to giving the world a very honest view of the missing persons community. Right now, I am arranging for him to interview families in the New York and Tampa area. I'm not sure when the project will be completed, but I think it's going well so far. And finally, a very small percentage of you continue to have audio issues when listening to Unfound. I urge you to visit the Unfound podcast discussion group on Facebook and look for the long write-up I did months ago on how to get the best sound for this program. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on YouTube for the Unfound live show. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound podcast. This week, I need to thank Julia. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise, the books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Do not forget the reviews. Shirts at myshopify.com. Cards at makeplayingcards.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Dori Ann Myers, Donna Jean Cap. Donna Jean, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you, Jeff.
Let's start here. You are Dori Ann's sister, younger or older, and how many siblings do you two have?
Well, I'm older than Dori, and I had an older brother who passed away the same year Dori went.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he passed away in November of that year, and she went missing in January. So there are no other siblings but me.
Oh, my. Well, that must have been that time must have been very difficult for you.
Yeah,
Wow.
pretty rough year.
Yeah. I can't imagine that. I lost my biological mother and my mother in 2018, but I'd have to think that it's something similar to that. Wow. Okay, so you were Dori Ann's older sister. What was she into?
Oh, wow. Everything.
Yeah.
She loved to ride her bike. She had a Harley, and she had just sold it. But that was one of her joys, was that, and her animals. And she was a hairdresser, and she liked to put puzzles together, and she liked to read. And she just was a fun lady to be around. She liked to play Texas Hold'em poker. And anybody that met Dori, nobody forgets Dori.
So she was, when you say into bike, she was into motorcycles. She had a big Harley then, huh?
Yeah, she had a Harley.
That's spectacular. Okay. And when you talk about her like that, I mean, would you say that you two were similar, or were you kind of polar opposites? How would you compare?
We enjoyed putting puzzles together. We liked doing the flea market thing and the garage sale thing and making something out of nothing, and so we had that a lot in common there.
Did you get to see each other? I mean, maybe, of course, growing up you got to see each other a lot, but as adults, would you say that you kept in touch? Did you live close together? What would you say?
We always lived pretty much near each other, and if we didn't, it wasn't for just a short time, and one of us were going where the other one was. And but at one point, yeah, we were apart for quite a few years because I lived up in Mississippi and she lived down in Florida. But we talked to each other constantly. We had a thing about the Survivor, and the show
Oh, the
Survivor.
TV show Survivor. Okay,
Yeah,
yes,
so
yes.
that was one of our weekly calls, and we just called each other all the time. I mean, she's my best friend.
So you were complaining or happy about who got voted off the island then,
Right.
right? Okay. I have to say I really didn't get into that show, but I know the generalities of it. Okay. So you like to talk about that, and I also know as an adult she was a big supporter of veterans, which I think is going to play a part in our discussion later. She was into supporting veterans.
Oh yeah, yeah. Dori. Well, our family were veterans.
Oh.
My grandfather, my father, my brother. We have nephews, nieces, cousins that were in the military, and she's always supported the military. And
Okay.
she was a member of the VFW, and uh, she just did what she could. You know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I really respect her for that. That's great. Now, she did have a son. Was she married before? Of course, I don't. She wasn't married at the time of her disappearance, but had she been married before? And what can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
She was with Jesse's father, and he passed away when Jesse was only 2 years old. Um, so that was her soulmate in this world, and I don't think she ever quite got over that. My brother-in-law, Jesse's daddy, he passed away in let's see, 81 or 82, probably 82, from carbon monoxide.
Oh
Had
my.
gone through their apartment, and he had a buddy over there, and they both died in the apartment from carbon monoxide.
Oh my. Oh
But
my.
anyway, so that was her love of her life, and um, she never married. Well, she married again after that, but I believe that was her soulmate. Rick was.
Right. The father of her son was the guy that she was supposed to spend her life with, and then that happened.
Exactly. And so she married, and that marriage didn't last, and she married again.
Hmm.
That one didn't last, so she never got married again.
Okay. All right. So, and that happens. It's just.
Yeah.
And so she raised her son. I mean, I know she got married a couple times, but essentially she raised her son by herself.
Yeah, she did. She did.
Mm-hmm. How was she as a mother? She sounds like a lot of fun if she was riding a Harley and everything. Her son must have
She was
enjoyed
a
that.
lot of fun, and she was very tough.
Was she?
Yeah, she wanted him to grow up to be a man that could take care of himself, and she didn't give in to little whims. I mean, she made him be a man, and
Yeah.
she was a good mother. If she was to say it herself, she'd say she wasn't. Uh, Only because she was so tough on him, and she wished that she had been more. Because she moved around and she couldn't make it last with her two husbands, so she'd always said, I wish I could have gave him a pretty, a stabler world, but
Right.
he never wanted for anything. But
Okay.
and there's nothing she wouldn't have done for him.
Right. And like you said, she was a hairdresser, beautician, cutting people's hair. Did she run her own place or did she work at a salon? What'd she do?
She always worked for somebody else.
Okay. Okay, and maybe I should ask this, what kind of, and we're going to get into Joe Jones here in a second, but what kind of relationship did she have with those exes? Did they hang around afterwards, or was it clean break?
They were friends, yeah.
They were friends.
Yeah, both of her ex-husbands loved her. Matter of fact, her first husband passed away probably 8 months after she did. Um, he had cancer.
Oh
But
my.
anyway, they were friends even after they split up. And same with Glenn, her other husband. They were talking, and they were, matter of fact, I think they were supposed to go out on a dinner date or something before she went missing. But They were buddies. They were all friends.
Uh-huh.
Would you say that these two ex-husbands were good guys? I mean, I know the marriages doesn't work, but sometimes good people can't get together.
Exactly, and I think they're both good guys. It's just that Steve, I hate to talk, about Steve because he's gone, but he was a drinker and he wasn't nice to her all the time,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that and Glenn, he wasn't, but he was a great guy, but he worked too much. So
Yeah. Okay.
different personalities, different life, just different.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about the relationship that's probably going to play the most prominent part in this case, this disappearance regarding Dori Ann, and that is Joe Jones. First of all, do you know how Dori Ann and he met?
You know what? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure how they first got together.
Mm-hmm.
I really can't answer that.
Okay, all right, that's fine. When do you remember him first being on the scene? When you first, maybe Dori Ann first told you, "Hey, I got this new boyfriend. His name's Joe." When do you remember when that was?
I believe I had flown down to. Uh, I brought the plane into MIMS, or that airport right there, and she came and picked me up, and that's when I met him, I believe. And that's been a while back.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even remember what year.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, she had told me about him, but I just had never met him.
Right. Right.
And I met him, and they were together quite a few years.
Okay. How would you say that they were dated for 5 years before she disappeared? And the status of the relationship is maybe still a little bit of a question in this disappearance. But how long would you say that they dated? How long would you say that they dated before she disappeared? 10 years? 7 years?
I can't even say that.
Okay.
My mind is blank. I do not know why I can't remember dates or years there. Yeah, they were together for years, but I don't know how many.
Okay. That's fine. How many times would you say that you were around him? What did you think of him? Was he a good guy compared to maybe some of her ex-husbands? What did you personally think of Joe?
I liked Joe. He always seemed to. I mean, no matter what Dori wanted, he always seemed to help her with, or do for her. But then also, on the other hand, I mean, they went on vacation a lot. They'd go across state, or they always went somewhere, and they always seemed to have a really good time.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't always real nice to her, and that was usually if he was drinking. And he didn't drink a lot, but when he did, he wasn't usually, they didn't get along.
Okay. Okay. So,
I can't tell you about their personal life at home. She didn't ever really divulge all of that, but she did say that, that he had hit her one time.
Mm, okay. So mainly at this point, when they were a couple, you weren't living near her. You were a couple hours away or something like that.
Not in the beginning, but let's see. So she went. I know in 2004 or 2002 we were down here. We moved. Well, I keep saying down here. I mean down there. She. I'm trying to get my dates here. We were in Vero in 2002.
Okay.
They were together then. So. Yeah, we saw them all the time.
Okay.
She had a house out in Lakewood Park, and I had one out in Paradise Park, which is they're quite a few miles in distance, but close enough that we saw each other all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Her and I went to lunch all the time, and
Okay.
go to her hair shop. But yeah, I saw them quite often.
Okay. And like you said, you like Joe in general, but maybe he had maybe a darker side to him, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, not like everybody doesn't. I mean, I don't
Mm-hmm.
see anything way bad out of the ordinary, so
Okay.
can't really say. I mean, I want to put all kind of connotations into everything he's ever done, but I really can't
Right,
because I don't know for a fact.
right.
I'm pretty much a fact person,
Well, let me just ask you this: how did Joe and Dori Ann's son get along? Was he a good mentor to him, or?
Well, no, they weren't around each other. They did go see my nephew lived in Milwaukee,
Oh,
but my sister and Joe did go out to Milwaukee several times to see him, and they got along just fine.
okay,
And then when my nephew would visit here or there, they got along just fine.
okay. And what did Joe do for a living?
He was a truck driver, and he worked for some companies around Vero. I don't know the names of them.
Okay,
I know
okay,
that his main job was truck driver.
Okay.
And when you say truck driver, do you mean like long haul, like going like up and down the East Coast, or just around Florida? What do you know?
He went more than just the east coast of Florida, and I think he went more than Florida. Matter of fact, I know they did because my sister had made some tapes um, when she went out on the road with him one time, and just showed me some
Mm.
of the area where they were at. And one of them was Tennessee, and I don't know where all they went, but it was kind of. I believe I had told you about him coming into her house after she went missing, and he took
Mm.
tapes and stuff. Well, those were some of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're certainly going to talk about that. Okay. All right. So they got around a little bit. She would get in the truck with him if she had some time, and
Yeah.
kind of see the sights while he's doing his job at the same time. And both of my brothers were truck drivers at one point, so I know all about that. Okay. And just to be clear, though, what was the status of their relationship, the way you understand it, at the time of her disappearance?
They were split up.
They were split up. Okay. Do you know why?
Uh, I don't. I can't really give you the specific reason why. I think Dory just had enough of
Mm.
whatever was going on between them. And well, they went on a cruise with my stepmom and my dad
Mm-hmm.
in December. And really the only reason that Dory went with him was because my dad had already paid for the tickets for the
Oh.
cruise. And so they split up before that, but then you know, they didn't get back together. They just went together on that cruise with my dad and my stepmom and my grandmother was already gone then. But anyway, so that was in December, and then she went missing in January.
Right. How did they do? Maybe you didn't hear it necessarily right from Dory, but was it your mother and your stepfather that went on the cruise with them?
Yeah,
Okay. What did they say about how Dory and Joe got along during the cruise?
they didn't say.
They didn't say.
And all videos that my dad had showed that everything was okay, and
Okay.
she wouldn't have put it out there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
She wouldn't have put it out there for anybody to see that anything was even wrong.
Okay.
Uh, she wouldn't have wanted to ruin their holiday on the ship.
Okay.
So that's how Dory was.
Okay.
Now, any other time, if it hadn't have been something like that, she might have just came right out and said, yeah, because Dory was she spoke her mind usually.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to see, it's of course the listeners, they hear two people are split up going on a cruise together. That is maybe at least a little strange, but I can understand if the cruise was already paid for, somebody had to go.
Exactly. And, the way it was that they weren't fighting, if you know what I'm saying. They weren't
Mm.
fighting or anything.
Okay. All right, let's move. So they went on this cruise in December, not long before she disappeared. So once again, I realized that, of course, you didn't see her every day or something. Maybe talking to her.
Go on that cruise. My husband and myself were supposed to go on that cruise.
Oh, you were.
But I had told him back in the beginning that we weren't gonna go because my husband won't get on a boat.
Okay.
He's not a seaman.
All right. He saw Titanic one too many times.
I know he used to fish with his uncle out in the ocean and stuff, and he's not all about it. He knows about all the rogue waves and things like that. So no, he wasn't going.
Okay.
I can't get him on a plane either. So.
Okay. Or I can understand jets for sure. I can understand that. Let's move up now to January, just for those few weeks before she disappeared. Now that you look back at it now, anything that she told you about or you found out from other people, from your mother, anything else, anything you look back now and maybe was a little out of the ordinary, that was maybe something that you saw as a change in her life in contrast to like the years, months, weeks before?
Well, there was some family issues that we had, and but I don't believe that any of that had anything to do with what happened to her.
Okay.
It's something I'd rather not discuss.
Sure.
Family related, and we were having quite a little problem there for not just her and me specifically, just it was family.
Okay.
What's going on?
Well, we only talk about things that could have anything to do with the disappearance here. I know every family has their stuff going on. I'm just saying anything that might have caused you to think, you know what, Dori's kind of walking on a thin line here with something like that.
Well, there was, looking back on it now, I'm not sure if something happened, but I think it's very odd that she had gone with a friend of hers over to Belize, and she took a lot of pictures while she was over there. And she invited me over one day, and we were just looking through them. And this was right before she went missing, because I think she went over there. Let's see. I think it was after the cruise. I'm not sure, because the cruise was early December. This was later in December. But she went over there with a friend. His name was Jimmy Lee. And her pictures, when her house caught, when the fire department showed up and the police showed up and everything the night that she went missing, those pictures were sitting on her bathroom counter in her guest bathroom, which is a very strange thing to me. And it looked like they had been gone through. So that seemed kind of strange to me.
And where did she maybe you could just say this again. Where did she visit? Where were these pictures from?
Belize.
The country, Belize, down in South America, Central America. Okay.
And she told me it was, she had a really good time over there, but she said that there was a little bitty baby airport out in the middle of nowhere. Now, I don't know why she said that. I was maybe thinking that was the size of the town they went to or something,
Mm-hmm.
But now looking back, I'm thinking maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. But these are all speculations.
Right, it is a little bit. Yeah.
It's like I look back and I see all these little things that all I can do is speculate, and I don't know anything for sure. So,
Right.
That is weird, though. I agree with you, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. But yes, pictures being laid out, in the bathroom or wherever they were, it seems.
Pictures in a bathroom. That's
Yeah.
not something she would have
Right.
done.
I agree.
And then Jimmy Lee was killed on his motorcycle not 6 months after she went missing.
Oh my.
I know. So it's just all kind of things that are kind of, looking back that freak me out. That I think about, and I know, I don't have any proof of anything.
Okay.
don't know if I'm thinking wrong or what.
Yeah. These things are going to stick out. That's for sure. Let me just ask you a couple more things about that day, and then we'll get into, that night. But did anybody know that her plan for that on January 10th was to go play in this poker tournament? Had she told anybody about that? You said that she was into playing poker earlier, but did anybody know she was going to this tournament?
I really don't know. I don't know if she told anybody or not, but Dori and I had a little argument like the day before she went missing.
Hmm.
And, yeah, which really sucks. But she had told, the only reason I'm mentioning this is because it's in the records anyway.
Okay.
She had told a bartender, she was like, did you ever wish you could just disappear and start over or something, But she was drinking and she was upset with me, and, could have, she could have said that, but she never would have. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Not in the manner and way that things went down.
No, of course not.
And she would have never left her pets there, and she would have never, just, if she wanted to just disappear, she would have just did it.
Right.
She would have just said, look, I'm out of here and later for y'all, that's how Dori is. She would have just said, I'm tired of this and I'm out of here. And then we'd talk later and she'd come home,
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been, like what happened. So as far as the poker game, no, I don't know if she told anybody that night. I know the week before she had or maybe it was 2 weeks before, I don't know, she won first place at the same place, and she was trying to hit for a $5,000 table to go to Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if anybody knew she was going. And matter of fact, at that time, when she won that first place, Joe was at her house that day, or that next day.
Right.
But they weren't together, but he was there.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I don't see him for a while, and this happened.
Okay. Let's talk about that day then. Let's just get right to the day. What do you know, what after all these years, what do you know about the movements of Dori Ann, the day to the night that she disappeared?
Well, I really don't. The day, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. Because I don't think I talked to her that day. Yeah, I did talk to her that day, but just briefly. And we were supposed to go to lunch with my stepmom up in Melbourne, and I couldn't go. And she was kind of upset about that. That's, what we were having a thing about. But anyway, she went, I guess, to the Hillbilly Hideaway, which is where she was going to play,
Mm-hmm.
and all the tables were full. So she sat around and waited, and even the owner said that she was drinking ice water, and she sat and waited, but the tables were just taking too long to get on, so she just decided to leave. So the owner even said, I wish I would have made a table open for her.
Yeah.
That's what he said after the fact.
Right.
But, so anyway, she left there, and I guess she stopped at Pineapple Joe's along the way, which is where a lot of the veterans go and a lot of people go. She knows everybody there and been going there for years. But they said that she didn't have anything to drink there either. And then I guess she had to go right by where I was staying to get to this St. Lucie Inn. And I guess she went there. And then it's all kind of sketchy from there. I just don't know.
Okay. But the St. Lucie Inn is the last public place that she was seen. Maybe she went somewhere after that, but we really don't know. But it's believed that that was the last place that she was, and you just happened to be there at the same time. You said she went by where you were staying. Where were you staying?
No, no, no. She didn't stop. She just had to drove by there.
Right.
I always wondered why she didn't just stop on her way there.
To see you.
Yeah.
Where were you?
We had just got hit by Gene and Francis, and we lost our house over in Paradise Park to that. So we were living in a travel trailer that FEMA gave us, and we're staying in a park right there on US 1.
Okay.
And she had to drive right by there, so I don't know. I'm not sure why she didn't. I mean, like I said, we kind of had an argument because I didn't go to lunch with her and Lisa, but that was nothing.
Okay. Yes.
It was like, that's just a fly-by-night little thing.
Right.
So I never could understand why she didn't stop by that night, but it's kind of sketchy. The bartender said that they saw her talking to some people. First it was 2 women and 2 men that they'd never seen before. Then it was, I don't know, she was talking to all of them, and then she was talking to the 2 guys that were with, those other 2 girls, and nobody ever saw her leave. That's what they're saying. Nobody saw her leave. And, we checked all the places along the route that she'd had to go to get home to see if they stopped to get beer or cigarettes or anything like that, because surely they would have had to, because these guys apparently were looking for a way back to what they said was Miami.
Okay. Well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, Donna Jean. Let's not get too hard. Okay, so let me ask you this. That night that she was going to play in this poker tournament. There wasn't a table open. Does everybody say that she was traveling by herself? She wasn't with anybody else. She might have met people at these places, but she was by herself.
Yes, she was.
Okay. Okay. So she went to these places. As you say, she was seen talking to different people at these different locations, including the St. Lucie Inn, maybe some women, maybe some men. But according to the public records, the next thing that we know about this, though, is at approximately 10 p.m., the guy that we've already talked about, Joe, calls her, and she's at home. What do you know about that?
He supposedly called her, and she told him that everything was fine. She was playing darts and cards with these 2 guys that she was going to let stay for the night, that they were Marines wounded in Iraq and trying to get home.
Okay.
That's all I know about that.
Okay, so by 10 p.m., what you're saying is he called her at home. By the way, did Dori have a cell phone or not?
She had a cell and a house phone.
Okay.
What I think she had talked to him earlier than that, and then the last time, because I guess he called a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
He said he did.
Okay.
I didn't see that on any of her phone records, but he said he did.
Okay. But he's saying that he called her and she said that she was at home with these 2 guys. They were playing darts, having a couple beers. We have to remember that she's a supporter of vets, so if she did run into these guys somewhere, they say they're Marines trying to get back to home. She invites them over to her place, and they're just hanging out.
Right.
Okay. Has Joe ever offered an explanation as to why he would have called her anyway?
No.
None. Okay. Does it sound odd to you? Did what you know about your sister, did Dori often go out by herself?
She would have, but what I know about my sister is that she would have never taken anybody home with her, especially 2 people that somebody else didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's my total honest feeling.
Mm-hmm.
She wouldn't have just taken two strangers to her house. I just don't feel like she would have done that. So.
Okay. Even if they were veterans, even though they might have been she might have started to talk to them and feel very comfortable with them, that they were telling the truth. Maybe they had their dog tags or something like that and said, you know what, you need a place to stay. Sure, I'll pull out the couch for you or something like that.
She, I'm not going to say she didn't because something apparently did happen.
Okay.
But I always believe that somebody had to have known who they were. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I generally agree with you. I mean, for a woman to go out by herself and take two strangers back to her house, that's fairly rare.
Yeah.
It's fairly rare. So I agree with you.
That's how this world is. I mean,
yeah.
Naive, you know.
Right. Right. And I should say that Dori does sound to me like streetwise. You know, she's not naive, you know. So I agree with you. That's why I wanted to say she was by herself, but somehow she met these guys, and I know the listeners are gonna do some speculation on that. But so he allegedly calls her at 10, allegedly, and we'll talk about the phone records a little later. And she says these two guys are at her place. But what is the next thing that we know about that night? It had to do, I guess, with the neighbors.
Well, the neighbors said they heard arguing about 12:30, and the thing about that was, like, Dori had told her neighbors, if you ever hear us over here just getting loud, and because Dori and them played darts a lot and listened to music and played cards, and things could get a little, and they live right on top of each other out there in Lakewood Park.
Right.
But she always told them, don't just call the law, and I think she probably meant if you don't see anything bad going on, don't just call the law every time.
Right.
So they apparently didn't, and that's
okay.
Thanks, because had they known, I guess they would have.
So when you say neighbors, do you mean just one neighbor, or do you mean like neighbors on both sides of her house or across the street? How do you know?
Yeah, her neighbors across the street, her neighbors beside her on both sides, all knew how Dori was, and she didn't want the law to be called for no reason. If they were just, she'd rather them just come over and say, look, your music's a little loud, could you turn it down?
Yes.
Like that. Just to be neighborly, don't just call the law. So that's where that was.
Okay. And so that's the reason that when they heard some arguing, maybe they look back at it now, it seems like arguing. Maybe at the time, it just seems like people maybe having a good time or something.
Well, no, they said now, after the fact, that they believe it was, they were arguing.
Okay.
They had run out and told the police, because they at the time didn't know what was going on, but they called, whenever the police showed up, they said, look, her car just went around that corner right there. You need to go get her and let her know her house is on fire. Because at the time they thought that, something happened after she went outside. They didn't know.
Right.
And nobody ever followed her car.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So they hear this arguing. They don't call the police once again because there's just a mutual understanding. Neighbors, maybe just letting things go, slide a little bit here and there. But then at 3 a.m., at least one of the neighbors realized that her house was on fire. What'd they do?
Well, they didn't realize the house was on fire first. They noticed that the garage door opened, and they heard the trunk on her car slam, and then they saw the car going away, and then they saw the fire, and that's when they called the fire department and the police.
Oh, my.
And as soon as the police got there, which is, they're right down the road from where she lives, so she said, look, that's what the one neighbor said. She goes, we told him. Her car just went down that way. You need to go get her and let her know, because if she didn't take her animals, she's got animals in there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where that stands.
Okay. All right, so I'm guessing that the police show up at some time after 3 a.m. or whatever time it was. The house is on fire. I'm guessing the fire company, the fire department shows up. They start putting it out. Do those neighbors, being that they heard something, they heard the slamming they saw a car, they heard the trunk slam, etc. Did they see her? Did they see these other guys did they see anybody?
They didn't see anybody. They just heard and saw the car going away.
Okay.
Never saw who or how many or anything like that.
Okay, and did they see anybody else's vehicles in her driveway? And people, by the time they hear this, I will have pictures of her house posted, so at least many of the listeners can know what we're talking about here. But did they notice any other cars besides her in her driveway or parked out on the curb, anything like that?
No.
None. Okay. Okay, so Dori's car is speeding away, and then shortly after that, the house gets caught on fire, and then, but she of course doesn't come back, and this is where the disappearance starts. But later that morning, her car is found. Where is it found?
The car was found in Glades County over in Moorhaven. It's about 80 miles from her house.
80 miles.
They found her. It's over, wow, and it's way over there on the other,
Mm-hmm.
Okeechobee. And it was at a boat ramp, and you would have had to know where this place was to get there. I mean, so that to me shows that the story of the wounded Marines doesn't make much sense if they knew all about that area over there.
Okay.
Is this an area that would have even been familiar with Dori?
No.
You don't believe she'd ever been? And once again, this will be another situation where I will be able to show some pictures of that location and some maps and things for the listeners so they can check that out. But she had, to your knowledge, she had never been to that area before.
No, not as far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked about everything.
Mm-hmm.
She would have told me.
Okay. But the car just wasn't sitting there, was it? It was on fire as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Huh.
It was engulfed in flames, which is very strange to me.
Right?
That they showed up. I mean, as far out in the woods as it is, and way, across the bridge to get to this boat ramp, how did they know that car was out there on fire?
That's a good point. That's something that the listeners, once they see the maps and everything, they'll know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Her car and everything?
Right. So, in fact, you had told me from my notes that when whoever called it in or whoever discovered it, whoever saw it, the fire department got to the car so fast that the car was still on fire when they got there.
Yes, it was.
So it couldn't have been set too long before they got there.
Exactly. I mean, they have pictures of it on fire.
Mm-hmm. I've seen them. Yeah. Okay. All right. So but to this day, in 2019, we're doing this interview on May 22nd, 2019. To this day, you don't know who saw the car. You don't know who called it in, anything. Maybe the police do, but they've never told you.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. All right. So we have this burning house, and we're going to talk about that in a lot of detail very shortly. And then we have her burning car and in both cases, there are obviously issues of arson, fires being set, on purpose. Was there any?
The investigator was at her house,
Mm-hmm.
and I did hear him say that he believed it was arson.
Okay. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind at this point, of course. Anything for the car? Anything salvageable from it, or was it completely destroyed?
Completely destroyed.
Okay. And we'll go back to the house here in a bit. So, okay, so this fire at the house, the fire at the car. I mean, how long after that do the police and whoever else start to think, you know what, we think that Dori Ann Myers is missing? And when did you find out about, of course, you weren't there that night or anything, when did you find out that all of this happened?
I found out the next morning. My father called me, and Joe had called him. And the reason that he called my dad was because his number was the last number on my sister's cell phone. So they called him. The police did. And why the police didn't call my daddy or me is beyond me, but they didn't. But I found out through my father.
Okay, so he called you and told you about the house fire. He told you about the car fire. And being that you knew about the car fire, I guess your thought was, probably she's not in the house. She's probably somewhere else. Or what were you thinking at that time?
I just felt amazed. And I think I knew right then and there that something bad was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So,
okay.
I keep trying to think that
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think everything was all right.
Right. Right, but it's, you had told me in a prior conversation that when he told you that, you kind of just collapsed.
I did.
You told me that, yeah. Okay.
Lost all mobility in my legs, and it's a terrible thing to have to hear.
Yeah. Okay.
Did the police, let's just stick on the car for a little bit, being that the car was on fire and was right next to like a boat launch or a lake, did they do anything in the lake? Did they drag the lake? Do any searches around the lake to your knowledge?
I have no idea. They said they did,
Mm-hmm.
but they wouldn't allow. I had called Texas Equal Search. I called, and then I finally got a hold of the Q Center, and they weren't allowed to search. So I don't know what the whole deal was with that.
Okay. So you don't know on the record for a fact that being that her car was found next to this lake, whether the police ever sent divers out into this lake. And once again, by this time, people have seen the pictures of how big it is and everything. You don't know if that was ever searched back then, or even to this day.
I only know that they told me they did.
Okay.
They didn't tell me how extensive or what that was used, or I've heard so many stories that I don't.
Right.
I mean, I think I delved a little bit into the Indian reservation and all that with you.
You did. Yes, you did.
That in itself, I don't know. That none of that is in any records that I can find.
Okay.
Where was Dori's son? His name is Jesse. Where was he when all this happened?
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee. And how did he find out?
I believe I called him.
Did you?
It was either me or my father.
Okay. And did he come? Was he able to come right down to Florida and take part in everything, or was he caught up in what he was doing there?
He came down as soon as he could. He had to make arrangements for his dog and his world up there to come. And yeah, he did show up, and I guess it was probably a week later.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so just to sum this up, she's at home. There's this phone call from her ex-boyfriend, Joe, and she says that she's with a couple guys who are military veterans, allegedly Marines, maybe Iraqi vets, possibly. And it's possible because some people did see her talking to some guys earlier in the evening. The neighbors hear these arguments. Then at 3 in the morning, they hear slamming of maybe the garage door going up, the trunk being slammed down, her car taking off, and shortly after that, her house goes up in flames. And then somebody calls a car in on flames 80 miles away, out kind of in the middle of nowhere by this lake. And the police and fire department show up there. It's Dori's car, and there's nothing that can be salvaged from the car. So that's where we stand. And let's just go what we now call to the rest of the case. What I call this segment after we get through the particulars. Let's move back to the house. You've already talked about the house going up in flames, but that just wasn't the oddest thing about the house. You'd seen it. Maybe you'd seen some pictures. Maybe you or your father, some other people went inside. You saw some things that you thought were out of character for Dori and how she kept her house, because people need to understand the house didn't burn down. There were only certain sections of it that were burned. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, Donna Jean?
Yeah, I thought that it was very strange that, a lot of things were knocked over by the fire department. I understand that. But when it came to how my sister was, if you were going to have a beer in her house, you take the one you just got done with, throw it in the garbage, and grab one. No problem. But there was broken beer bottles all over the floor, and which I'm sure got knocked off onto the floor by the firemen, but they were still had to have been there.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing was her ashtray. It was just full of cigarette butts, and that is something my sister never, ever did. She used small ashtrays on purpose for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted you to put your cigarette butts out. There could be a couple of them in there, but she was constantly emptying it. She didn't like any of that sitting around. So that to me was very, very odd. And
you had mentioned that we can't forget those pictures that are sitting in on the bathroom sink or somewhere, which seems like the oddest place in the house to have some pictures.
Yeah, because she never would have. There's no reason to have a pack of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
She hadn't had a chance to even put them in an album yet, but she would have never just took them into the guest bathroom and left them sitting on the counter.
Right.
So that was odd to me.
Right.
And then,
why don't you tell them about the bed, how it had been burned?
yeah, it was only burnt on one side, and I'm assuming it's the side that she was on. And there was a bottle of vodka sitting up by the TV. She would have never done that. Dori was one that if you make a drink, you make a drink in the kitchen with a, shot glass, or you either, you pour it, whatever. But she would have never just took a bottle into her room. So that was very out of place.
Mm-hmm.
And only one side of her bed was burned. I think the blanket was gone from her bed.
I know you're not a fire expert, Donna Jean, and neither am I. But I've seen the pictures. Of course, you sent the pictures to me at one point. And would you call this maybe a strategic burning? That they'd only wanted to burn certain areas of the house instead of burning it all down?
I think they wanted to burn it down, but they made sure that all the places that would have DNA or anything like that, I'm sure they made sure that that was going to be burnt if the whole house didn't go up in flames.
Right. Right, and I think that the listeners, once they see a picture of the house, it's still standing. And at least from the outside, I don't know if it ever did get fixed on the inside, but from the outside, you can't even tell that it ever been burned at all.
Yeah, you can just see the flames coming through all the windows. And if you notice, all the windows, the curtains are on the outside of the window.
Yeah.
They closed the windows, and they closed it on top of the curtains, so the curtains are hanging outside of the house.
Okay.
And that's very strange. So that was definitely not her doing that.
Right.
And then her animals. That was,
Right. You had mentioned before that the animals how many animals did she have?
She had a cat and a dog, Miss Chris and Miss Emily. Emily was her lab. She called her Flavolab because she was so fat, but
Huh.
she had her forever, and that was her little girl. She would have never let anything happen to her if it was in her willpower or her will to do it.
But to be explicit, it looks like whoever set this fire closed the pets in a room so they couldn't escape.
Yeah, in her computer room. Yeah.
Something, of course, Dori would have never done. Of course. No. Ever.
No. She'd have took them with her if she was just going to leave.
Right. Were her, as far as other things, of course, we've mentioned the beer bottles out of place, the cigarette butts, the bed being burned on one side. And once again, for listeners who haven't seen the pictures yet, this is going to make a lot more sense once you do see the pictures. And I will be posting them in the group, on the Facebook page, on Instagram, so everybody has access to them, probably on YouTube as well. But was her phone there? What about her purse, her money, those things? Were they still there or were they missing?
Her phone and her purse were still there. I don't have them. The police apparently still have them. I don't know. Another thing that was very out of place, because my sister had a baseball bat that she kept by her bed. And actually, I don't know if it was a baseball bat or a axe handle. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he never went for that. But apparently, whatever happened, she must have gotten in her closet and pulled out a gun. It was a rifle that belonged to my nephew that was his daddy's. And it had no ammunition for this gun, and Dori knew that. It wasn't loaded. But it was broken too. The stock and the barrel, it was broken too. One of them was by the door, the other one was over by the couch.
Wow.
You know, that...
Huh.
You know, that to me was very strange. Now, I've never seen this in any of the records. The police have never mentioned anything, so I'm not sure if this is something they want to keep from the public because they want to have some kind of, you know, the guys that did it, that nobody else would know these facts except them.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm saying, you know, what I should be saying, but I'm not getting any results any other way, you know.
You just let it fly, Donna Jean. What is it?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. That was regarding the gun?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
She would have never pulled that out unless she felt like she had no other choice, because there was no bullets in it. That was a scare tactic, I believe. And
Yeah.
Okay. Have the police or the fire department, anybody, ever let you know how these fires were started? Was it gasoline that was used? Was it paint thinner? What was it used?
They didn't say. The arson man that was there the day that I showed up said that there was an accelerant. He didn't say what kind.
Okay.
Gasoline would make sense, but you know, my question is, would Dori have had, you know, of course there would be gas in her car, but I'm just wondering if she would have had gas lining around the house, like in a container.
She had a lawnmower and she had a generator.
Okay. Okay.
She could have had a gas can there for that. Never know.
Okay. Well, then that is certainly a possibility. Okay, so we've talked about the car, how it was burned. It was completely burned, unlike the house, which it seems just was burned in certain locations. Of course, the listeners are saying, well, it was a fire, but the pictures could still be seen. Yes. It was a fire, but her phone wasn't melted. Yes. And once again, once you see the pictures, it's all going to make sense to people.
Oh, her TV melted. Her CD player melted off the wall. I mean, they made sure they put accelerant wherever they thought they needed it.
Okay.
Kitchen, maybe they didn't feel like they did, but
okay.
They left a beer bottle in the freezer that the police never even got. We took it to them. We took them all the cigarettes.
Yeah.
Because we told them those aren't Dori's friends, you know.
Yeah.
So we thought there might be some kind of DNA, but
Yeah, once fire gets involved, it's really going to be tough. It's just going to be it's going to be very difficult. You did say that she had a cell phone, but it wasn't taken with her. You'd mentioned earlier in the conversation that Joe was the last person to call her. Do you have her phone records from that day, that evening, that night, or what?
I got them back in the beginning, and I don't see him calling as many times as he did, or he said he did. So I really don't know. I mean,
Okay. Do you still have a copy of those today, or did you give that all to the police, or what?
I believe I have it all, but it's packed up somewhere. It's, you can tell. It's very hard for me to
Yeah,
go through all that.
I know.
And only just be me sifting through it and
Yeah.
trying to figure out. And, I guess if I had a bank of people to help me do that, I would go through all her stuff more thoroughly.
Yeah.
Because I keep thinking maybe there's a clue in there. Maybe there's something,
Okay. But as far as he says that he called her at 10 that night, and that's when she told him that these guys were over at her place, but you've had a chance to look at the records and you have them somewhere. You're saying that you could not find Joe's number on her records for that day or that night.
No, I didn't say I couldn't find anything. I just didn't find him calling as many times as he said he did.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think he called once, but that's
Oh,
what the record showed.
okay. Great. Okay. So once again, to your memory, any other numbers from that day that popped out to you as being strange? Anything out of the ordinary that you can remember?
No.
No. Okay.
So there's just for example, not like she called one of these military vets, if we're to believe that they really were there. No numbers to not people you couldn't identify.
No.
Okay.
Well, actually, I shouldn't say that.
Okay. Please.
I didn't recognize some numbers, but I called them all, and a lot of them were her clients, her hair clients.
Yeah.
So, excuse me.
It's all right. Take a moment if you need it.
Yeah, I believe those were her hair clients, and one of them was a friend of hers from somewhere else, not here or not there, but nobody that's been on there,
Okay.
as far as I could tell.
All right. Let's just talk about these two vets for a second. There are sketches out there, and where did these sketches come from?
Apparently, the bartender at the St. Lucie Inn.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so am I then to understand that? So here was like a sequence of events. So all of this happens. Joe comes forward to say, well, you know what? I called her and she said there were two vets at her house. Then the police go and then they tell the bartender, hey, we think she was with two guys. And then that's how these sketches got made. Do you think that's how it happened?
Well, just to clarify, he didn't come forward at all. The police called him because he was the last number on her phone.
Okay.
And after he told him where she supposedly was, I guess she's the one that had told him where she had been or whatever. She might have told him. I guess she had to have told him. But, yes, they went to the bar and spoke to whoever might have seen her or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the one that gave that description.
All right. And it looks like it's one white guy, one Hispanic guy. I'm going to say in their 20s or 30s somewhere, which would make sense if they were military vets. That would, I guess, make the most sense. We have to remember that uh, Dori might have had a soft spot in her heart for military vets, but military vets can be criminals too, frankly. So we just don't know. unfortunately. But to this day, to your knowledge, these people, these two guys that were seemingly identified at the bar, have never come forward to say, you know what, yeah, we were there, but we didn't go home with her. You've never heard anything about that?
Not a word.
Not a word. Okay. She had her ex-boyfriend, Joe, who it seems they were still kind of in contact. They went on this cruise in December. I know she's a single woman. Would she have just met some guys? I'm not here to get into her personal life, but is that a possibility that bring a couple guys home to her place?
Well, like I've said before, I don't feel like she would just bring them there unless somebody else knew them too. But maybe she had a soft spot for whatever they told her, and she did invite them to her house, and you could see where she had made them both a bed. And I mean, her couch had blankets and pillows on it, and her pull-out sofa in the game room was also pulled out. So,
Okay.
I'm assuming she was literally, in her heart, just going to give them a place to stay.
Right.
Not that she was taking them home for anything romantic.
Okay. So there is proof, kind of, it looks like there were other people that she was planning to have stay at her place overnight. Like you said, there were accommodations made.
Right.
Okay. And I should have asked this before when we were talking about the vets and them being identified. I know many bars, even back in this year, that she disappeared, would have video. Did the police ever try to get any video from that establishment?
I'm assuming they did. They said they did. We asked around too and couldn't get anything.
Okay. Okay, so there is nothing that, at least that we know of. Maybe the police do have something and they just haven't told you, which is possible, but we just don't know. But as we know, this disappearance is still unsolved all these years later.
Right.
All right, so we've been talking about these people, and of course, Joe's name has come up quite a bit. So let's just concentrate on him specifically. And where I want to start with this is that somehow he ended up at Dori's house just a couple days after that. Why don't you explain that?
Well, I just went by the house myself, and I hadn't even talked to Joe. And, well, as you can imagine, when I saw him, I mean, I broke down.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was her boyfriend at one time.
Yeah.
And anyway, he was there, but he had already started gathering up some things that he wanted. And in his mind, like he said, these don't mean anything to anybody else but me and Dori. And he picked up this little statue thing that she had bought him, and it was by the front door. And then he took some tapes, and I don't know what else he took because I wasn't there when he first got there.
So we gotta set this up. I think we got to set this up for the listeners, though. You're telling me that he was over at Dori's house by himself, going into a house that had been burned just a day or 2 days before that, and he was by himself.
Exactly. And never spoke to me about whether he could go in there or not, or nothing. No. And I think I was still shell-shocked, so I didn't know what to say to him, I was feeling bad for him like I was feeling bad for me, and trying to figure out what was going on, and I don't know why he was there.
Okay, so he's going into this house. I mean, if it's a burned out house, maybe he's essentially trespassing. It's not his house, right?
Exactly. He was.
Okay.
I guess he figured, I don't know what he figured. I'm not even going to answer it.
Okay. All we know is that we just want to stick to the facts. All we know is you went by her house one day and you just happened to run into him, and he was just kind of going in and out of the place as if he owned it.
Right. All right.
Okay. And I just have to ask, you, in your opinion, did it look like any of the things that he wanted to get had been burned, or did it look like the things that he wanted to get had been suspiciously unburned? You know what I'm saying? Did he say anything to you like, man, I really wanted to get this, but it looks like it got damaged in the fire? Did he ever say anything like that?
No, he never said anything like that, but the tapes that he took were underneath the TV, which was burned.
Okay.
Having stuff below the TV didn't. So.
Okay.
I never really thought about that question, so I don't know.
Okay, well, once again, I'm just putting it out there because I know that what the listeners are thinking. Well, maybe Joe had something to do with this. Well, I got to ask, I would be inclined to think that if he did cause this disappearance, then he caused this fire, and it wouldn't make any sense to me that he would burn things that he wanted to collect later. So that's why I'm asking you. Was like, oh, her stuff burned, but none of his stuff was? I guess that's what I'm asking you.
Well, on the other hand, too, the way I thought about it was if he had anything to do with it, why didn't he get it when it was all happening?
That's a good point, too.
So I don't know. Mm-hmm. I've looked at it from different angles, of why he was there, and never quite thought of that question of, do I think all his stuff was okay?
Right.
I really looked at it that way, but...
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. But at the time, when did you... I should say this. It didn't hit you at the time, but obviously it strikes you differently now. When, after you saw him that day, did it finally hit you? What exactly was he doing over there? When did that...
Pretty much after I left.
Pretty much after you left, okay.
Yeah, I was like, what was that all about, and why was he even there? I just didn't understand it myself. And, I didn't see him for a long time, so it kind of was strange anyway,
Okay. How long would you say you and he were together that day when you did see him going in and out of the house? A half hour, an hour? How long?
About a half hour.
Half hour?
He was already there.
Mm-hmm.
He was just wandering around, just gathering up stuff that he wanted.
He was treating it like a garage sale.
Well, I could see that the only thing he took, unless he took something else before I got there, the only thing that I could see that he took was that little statue and all those tapes. And then I got to wondering after that, this is only my speculation, but what was on those tapes that he had to have them so bad?
Well, I'd be inclined to think that as well. Do you know if the police, and we know the police did talk to him, did he ever explain to them, what he was doing trespassing on somebody's house?
I don't know if he explained to them because I never said anything to them, but he failed his first polygraph.
He did?
Yeah, he took 2 of them.
When was the first one taken and when was the second one taken?
Well, I can't tell you dates, and I can't even tell you how long after Dori went missing that it happened, but I know it was within that week or whatever. Wow. He went in and took a polygraph, and he failed it. And he went home to his father, who was a Green Beret or something in the military, I don't know, higher up. And his daddy told him to take a Valium, go back and take it again. And he did, and he passed.
How do you know that his dad told him that?
He told me his dad told him that.
Oh, is that right? Joe just came out and told you that?
Yeah, he came right out and told me that, so,
Okay. All right. When you were talking to him that day, when you encountered him, he was already there. Did he ever offer up any, did he seem worried? Did he seem sad about Dori's house, about her pets, about her being missing? How would you say his demeanor was that day?
Oh, wow. I guess I never really thought about it because I was in my own grief.
Mm-hmm.
But, to look at it when you ask that question, he had bought her a CD player that went up on the wall, and it was really nice, but it had melted from the fire and just slid down on the wall, and he had mentioned something about that. Like, and I'm thinking, to do with anything, who cares? The rest of the house is burned too,
Mm-hmm.
Thinking back, that was kind of a thing for him to say to me.
Yeah.
Did speak a lot because I just for some reason couldn't talk to him. I just felt like, I don't know, I was in my own grief and I didn't want him in it. Yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
Well, did he ever offer up? Of course, at that time, if Dori is only missing for a couple of days, maybe you're still hopeful she's going to be found alive somewhere or something. He never offered up any sort of theory. Did he talk about these guys that were over to her house? That he said he had this phone conversation with her when that was going on? Any of that come up while you saw him for that half hour?
No, he never said anything about that. And my husband, one time, my husband asked him a bunch of questions, but I don't think he offered up anything about what he, she's going to be all right, we'll find her. No, he never said anything like that.
No. So Joe's there. He's taking some things. Doesn't sound like he took a lot of stuff out of there. Is that your opinion? He didn't really take a lot, did he?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Doesn't sound like he took anything that was valuable that might have escaped the fire. He had these tapes. You mentioned these tapes and a few other things. But we do know lie detector test. Took one, failed it. The next one seemingly passed it. Maybe with the help of some Valium. Do you know what his alibi is for the night that Dori disappeared? Has he ever told you? Has he told the police? Have the police ever told you anything?
He was supposedly out of state on the road driving truck. But to me, now this is only my opinion. Do you want me to throw this in there?
Please.
Why would they have him take a lie detector if they could have proved that he was on the road through his work record?
Mm-hmm.
It always made me wonder what was the deal with that, But yeah, his alibi was that he was on the road working.
Okay.
And being that they did give him this lie detector test, what it means to me is that that's his alibi, but they weren't able to verify it. He could have been out on some highway in Tennessee or Louisiana, but unless he's actually at a depot or whatever kind of stuff that he's hauling, if he stopped at a warehouse or anything like that, unless those people see him, then nobody really can give him an alibi. That's what it sounds like to me, but it very well could be that, truck drivers work by themselves most of the time, so it's possible.
Yeah, there's no telling.
Okay. But the feeling that I get is that, he didn't seem too broken up about it.
I've never noticed him to be too broken up about it, no.
Okay. And in your opinion, being that they just went on this cruise a month before this, do you believe that Joe still had feelings for Dori? Do you think that he would have liked to have been in a relationship with Dori still to that day that she disappeared had she wanted it?
I believe so. Yes,
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, and just to remind everybody, what do you think the reason was that Dori did break up with him, and it had to do with what?
I just think that they couldn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they hated not that she hated him or anything. They just couldn't get along. Dori's very independent. She likes to do what, she lives her life, and maybe they just couldn't get along. I don't know.
Okay. And how long, and once again, I realize that dates and times and things get a little hard to say after all these years, but how long do you think that they were broken up before she disappeared? We know that they went on this cruise, but they were already broken up at that time in December. How long do you think they'd been broken up?
They hadn't been broken up long.
No.
No.
Okay.
And like I said, that he was over there. It's not like he had moved out, but it's not like he didn't come around.
Mm-hmm.
And she did, but she seemed like she didn't care if he was there or not. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when I'd go by, if he was there, she didn't say, I wish this asshole would leave or anything.
Okay.
She just,
Okay.
he just,
And mm-hmm. And the other thing I would ask you is, when they were together, were they living together at her house, or did they have separate places, or what was the situation?
when they first met, he was living with his father, who lived in the same neighborhood as her house, where her house was. But the house they lived in belonged to Dori. She bought that house on her own.
Okay.
And,
So the house that went up in flames is the house that Joe and Dori lived in together when they were a couple.
right.
Okay.
And she had just redone the roof. She'd just redone the septic system. She just paid off her car. Everything was going good for her, And
Okay.
You had mentioned to me in a prior conversation, our more recent conversation from earlier this year, that Dori might have had a new man in her life, but as of us recording this, you couldn't remember his name. Is that the case?
yes, it is. I had wanted to meet him, but he lived over in Fort Myers. And I guess they were kind of long distance seeing each other, I just never got the chance to meet him
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And matter of fact, she was supposed to meet his mother and family for Christmas.
Wow.
She wanted me to go with her to pick out a Christmas present with her. And then she never called back to say anything about going, so I never did go with her. But, he seemed important in her life, but by God, I cannot remember his name to save my life.
That's all right.
And matter of fact, when she went on that cruise with Joe, he stayed at her house to watch the animals for her.
I have to ask, why didn't she take that guy instead?
Because they had already paid for the tickets for Joe, and he'd already showed his passport. I guess it was in his name, and you can't change his name and all that, I guess.
Okay. All right, I'll have to think about that. I know the listeners will think about that a little bit as well. But this new guy watched her house while she was with Joe on this cruise. Well, that was nice of this guy.
But she, like I said, she didn't have any romantic feelings for Joe. Because it had been paid for, my parents paid for it. She didn't want to let him down,
Yeah.
and wanted to spend time with them.
Right. Sure.
She did.
Sure. But I think you have to understand also, probably listeners are going to be like, well, if the guy was available to watch her house for a week, then he could have gone on the cruise for a week. But you're saying that there might have been paperwork that needed to be done before the cruise, that it was too late to change it.
Right.
Okay. But you don't know how she met this new guy? I mean, she's in Vero Beach, which is on the Atlantic coast, and Fort Myers is on the Gulf Coast. How did they even meet? Do you know?
I think he has family in Vero, but I can't be positive. She hadn't been seeing him she hadn't been seeing him long, but she really liked him, what I'm getting around.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I never got a chance to meet him, so. Well, I sound like I don't know anything.
No, actually, I think you're doing great, Donna Jean. You know quite a bit, and then certainly we're covering a lot of stuff that I don't think is readily available, in the public. But the question I want to ask you about that is, after she disappeared, did this guy ever? I guess he never called you. He never called anybody else in your family to see what's going on. Anything?
No, and that is what to me is very, very odd. That to me, like, so weird, and that bothers me that I can't remember his name, because I feel like he should have contacted the family. He should have contacted my dad or me, because I know my sister talked to him about me. talked to me about him, so I know how she was. Her and I loved each other, so I know he knew about me.
Well, I'm going to ask you something then. Being that you still have these cell phone records somewhere in your house and you say they're packed away, and I know you haven't looked at them for a while, and I know that even just talking about this, listeners should know that Dawn and Jean and I have been talking about doing this interview for a very long time. And I know that this disappearance, of course, hurts you quite a bit. Okay. But do you think if we were to find those cell phone records that you have, that this guy's number would be on them?
I think I looked for Fort Myers' number after this happened because I thought the same thing. And let me just clarify a little bit more. I told you in the beginning when I first spoke to you that, Dori went missing in January.
Yeah.
My husband was given 3 months to live in March of the same year. And thank Lord, he had a transplant. He was sick for 3 years. We waited on the transplant list at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. So that's why a lot of things are packed up. That's why a lot of things have not been gone over by me because of everything I've been through.
Yeah.
That first year, in that first year.
Yeah.
So that's why
I get it.
I don't have any clear idea. But I will look through my paperwork, and I will let you know to let your viewers know if I can find out if she
Okay.
spoke to him.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification. Yes. Thank you. I'm just thinking if that would probably be if they were talking to each other and he was in Fort Myers. I mean, they were talking some way.
Exactly. And I haven't mentioned this either, but someone, and I don't know where I heard this, but someone told me that he had left his cat at my sister's house, and they believe that the cat died in that fire too. But I don't know that to be a fact, so I've never really said it.
Okay.
So you can add that or not.
Okay. All right.
Don't you think he would have gotten in contact with me?
I think. Well, that's why we talk about these things in every episode. These things are suspicious. When you hear about a boyfriend or a girlfriend who has a boyfriend or girlfriend go missing, and then that boyfriend or girlfriend seems to move on pretty quickly.
Exactly.
That happened. It does happen. So it's just interesting to me that if he was a good enough guy to watch her house for a week while she's on a cruise with another guy, even though it was over, it seems to me that type of person will also kind of call once in a while.
You would think.
You would think.
Okay.
Even if he hadn't met me yet, he knew.
Right. You're on Facebook. You're out there. It's easy to find. Okay. We need to talk about this. So there's this guy. Maybe we can figure out who he is, and might add another piece to this puzzle. Dori was declared dead. Why did that happen?
Well, my nephew her house was totaled, in the fire. The roof was gone, the whole, basically it was gutted. It was not salvageable. So my nephew wanted to get the insurance money for her house because he couldn't make the mortgage on it, and he didn't want it to go to a foreclosure or anything like that. But so I guess my dad and him went and spoke to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department believed that she was murdered. So they went to court with my dad and my nephew, and I couldn't do it because at the time I couldn't say those words, and because I just never wanted to believe that she was just gone. But anyway, they had her declared dead in 2007, I believe.
Okay. So not really too long. Just a year later, maybe a year and a half later.
Yeah.
Okay.
And see, I always felt like if you didn't do that, then there was, you weren't saying she was dead, but when you have her declared dead, I mean, that basically means that the police department believes that she is. And,
Mm-hmm.
that it's like then they kind of give up or something,
Yeah. Okay. Well, the thing is, I guess, I'm trying to think. Not too many of the missing persons cases that I've covered have the missing person been declared deceased. I think that's fairly unique, but
After years and years.
yeah, maybe after years and years, but within a year and a half,
It was definitely against my wishes to have that done. I would have done anything, except, like I told you earlier, I had a lot come down on me right after she went.
Yeah.
I couldn't participate in that part of it, but
Yeah.
no, you're right. Most people don't do that.
Yeah. Okay. But I do know that as tough as that was, as it continues to be, though, you've really gotten involved in missing persons in the community, and you work for the Q Center, right?
Yes, I do.
Why don't before we finish this interview, why don't we talk a little bit about that, how you got involved and what you've done?
Well, I looked around. I got on the computer after Dori went missing and just tracked down everything I knew about organizations that dealt with missing people, or just trying to find somebody to help me, And I came across the Q amongst, 10 other people. But they were having the Road to Remember tour in September of '06. Dori went missing in January. But anyway, Monica Kaysen was having the Road to Remember tour that year, and she included Dori on that tour. And she came to Vero Beach, and I had a rally for her there. Just set up some tables and had food and banners and things to put out by the highway, and had people out there waving things saying that Dori was still missing. And Monica came, and we did a couple of news interviews and got it out there a little bit. So that's how I met Monica, and that was in 2006. And she saw a lot of the things that I made for the rally, and she called me one day, and she says, "Did you do all that work that was at the rally?" And I said, "Yeah, I did that on my computer." And she asked me if I wanted to help out and do posters for the wall they have a conference once a year. And I'm self-taught. I'm not I didn't go to school to be a graphic artist, but I know a lot about it. So I've been volunteering. I volunteered for years, and then I became a state coordinator. And I make the brochures for the road tour. I make all the posters for the wall at the memorial wall, and anything that she needs me to do. And then I make all the missing posters that go on her website.
That's fantastic.
You've seen them, but
wow.
Yeah. They're like family.
I'm sure.
It's really, an organization where everybody that's involved, or most everybody that's involved, knows what you're going through because they also have a missing person, or know someone that does, or So yeah, I still do that.
Okay. And you got started on that, and you continue to do it.
Yes. Oh yeah. I've been with the Q.
Great.
Well, since Dori's been missing.
Okay. Now I know that you are a frequent poster on Facebook about Dori's disappearance. I see it all the time. Why don't you tell the listeners about if that's a page or however that is on Facebook, so others can check it out.
It is my page. It's just Donna Jean Cap. I had a page for Dori, but it was just too much for me to handle, so I just put everything on my page.
Okay.
And, that's on Facebook. I had a website for her at one time, but within the first 3 years, I had that up and running, and it was a beautiful website, and I had a lot on it, but I ended up having to let it go. Couldn't afford it, or well, I don't know what happened, but
Mm-hmm.
it was called Damn Mad, and it stands for Dori Ann Myers, Missing, Abducted, Duped.
Wow, that's a great acronym, I guess it is.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
I don't know where I came up with that, but yeah, it was called Damn Mad, and I
love it.
I had heard, what it stands for, and I've also I wrote a poem about her, and I had that published. But I do all I can to try to keep her out there and let people know that she's still missing.
Okay.
And I have a billboard designed for her, but those things are so expensive.
They can be. That's true. They can be. So if people wanted to find you, and once again, I know you post about Dori all the time, just look for Donna Jean Kapp, Kapp, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Donna Jean, all one word, Donajean. Kapp. Okay. All right. Any final words before we complete this interview, Donna Jean?
I just really appreciate you keeping Dori and me in your thoughts, and keeping on me to do this.
Yeah, if the listeners only knew, right?
Right.
If the listeners only knew.
It's been a while, and we've known each
Yeah.
other a long time, and we've both been through a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this for Dori, and I hope it helps, and I hope that, we can one day.
Yeah. Well, now, Donna Jean, now that you've done this interview, you're part of the Unfound family now. Okay, and as you know, that once this episode gets posted, it's going to be up forever. And probably realize since the first time you and I talked, which was a while ago, Unfound is quite bigger, than it was when. I think that when we first talked, I think there were 100 people in the discussion group. Now there's over 5,000. That just shows you how the program has grown, and we've done a lot of good things, and I'm sure you're aware of them over the last 2.5 years. And you and I have kept in touch, and I'm really glad that we could make this happen today.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay, great. But I think that I believe this is a case. It's very solvable. It's certainly, to me, not as mysterious as maybe some of the other ones, that I've covered. It seems like there's still a lot of information that can be found and dug up. Some of the things even that we've talked about in this episode. So I'm hopeful. But I deeply appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Donna Jean, thank you.
And that was my interview with Donna Jean Kapp, sister of Dori Ann Myers. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. Dori's disappearance is one I had on my list since the beginning of Unfound. It's a case that I've known about for years, well before this program started. I'm not sure why that was, but I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to have finally covered it and brought it to all of you. If you're wondering what some of the other cases are that were always on my mind before Unfound ever started, that we've featured, those are Teresa Butler, Joshua Guimond, and Bonnie and Jeremy Degas. Before I go into my summation that I do for every episode, I want to remind you again that my write-up for Dori's case, which will be much more complete than what you'll get here, will be available on Patreon for free to everyone. I will post the link to my analysis in the discussion group, on the Facebook page, on Twitter, and everyone on the Unfound newsletter email list will also receive it. Once again, for free. And now, my summation. There's so many elements in Dori's case that it's a little difficult to know where to start. We have the fires, which means her disappearance reminds me a lot of the Bible Freeman case from Oklahoma. But that case involved drug trafficking and a debt owed, neither of which is present in this case. We have a car that's ditched far from where the missing person lived. And that reminds me of these disappearances we've featured here. Greg Brooks, Rebecca Henderson, Travis Morrow, Robin Abrams, Donnie Smatlack, and many others. And those cases don't have much in common except for the vehicle situation. We seemingly have two men working together to make a person disappear. That isn't necessarily odd. We've had many cases where we believe there are multiple suspects. But what's different in Dori's is these two guys seem to work in tandem, as in their plan for that night was to go out, meet a woman they didn't know, and cause her disappearance and burn her house and her car. And although I'll admit I don't know every disappearance out there, my guess is that set of circumstances is very, very rare. Not to mention that most of the cases we cover on Unfound, we believe the best suspects are people who knew the missing person. But my concern is this. The way I understand this case, there seems to be some confirmation bias going on. What is that and how does that apply here? Confirmation bias is a process by which we come to conclusions that we believe are independent, when actually the results actually show our preconceived notions. This topic is always a concern for polling companies, for example. This is why they try to make the wording of questions as neutral as possible when talking to people over the phone or in person, whether the topic is politics, consumer products, movies, or whatever else. Well, in Dori's case, although I wasn't there, I am almost sure that when the police went to the bars Dori visited, they just outright said, "We believe she was with two guys." That may seem like a harmless comment, but it's not. First, why would the police say that? Because that's what Dori allegedly told Joe when he called her that night. She said she was with two military veterans, and the police took that info and used it to question patrons and employees at the bars. No doubt in my mind. What that does, though, by saying Dori was with two men at her house, that causes those being questioned to only think about that. And on top of that, generally, people want to help the police. So when a police officer says she was with two guys at her house, the average person doesn't want to disagree with the police. So it makes people more likely to agree, even if those people never saw Dori with two men. This phenomenon is well documented, not just in crime, but in all sorts of other parts of our culture. A great book about this and many other subjects related to this is Influenced by Robert Cialdini. So Ed, are you saying Dori wasn't with two guys at her house? Are you saying Joe is lying? Well, he certainly could be lying. For example, I still don't think anybody knows why Joe called her at 10 that night. I'm not sure he ever gave a reason, and there's the lie detector test and him being over at the house and going inside it without permission. But being that the bartenders backed up Joe's story about Dori being with two men, then I guess we must believe she was, and that Joe was telling the truth, despite my concerns about how those results were collected. Hey, we even have descriptions of these guys, but they've never come forward to identify themselves. So is that because they're guilty of Dori's disappearance? Or because they don't really exist? Or could it be something else? And they're looking to avoid their own figurative version of unfriendly fires. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.